Okay, so let's talk about finding readers, and this is the place that I would say many or even most authors find themselves in, where they just don't know where to get started. Some of this stuff you might have heard me talk about before in different ways in different programs, but I want to dig into it in a deeper and more comprehensive way here. The first way is to think about books and publishing as a marketplace. And think about, well, let's use that to your favor. How does the marketplace define your audience? How do they define genre and topic? And we have these wonderful constructs that we can tap into. So these are things like libraries and where they shelve things. When they create these little stands of kinds of books in the middle of like big areas in the library, what do they call them? What do they say about books and like those little shelf talker things? Like when you go to a bookstore and they've got the little blurb about books, how do they describe them? How does the store describe them? Where do bookstores shelve things as well, which is usually a little different than how a library shelves things. So we have all of these ways of doing that. Of course, we have the online versions of that. When you go to any book on Amazon, and I think it's a little different for the Kindle version, for the print paperback version, you scroll down, you'll see that it's this book ranks in certain categories. So you can actually look and see, oh, there's categories. Let me click into that. And they use this, I think it's called the BISAC system. It's this kind of standardized system. And you realize like, oh, Amazon has all these subcategories. And even for every book, you get to pick a few, or you'll rank in a few of them. It's not that every book falls into just one thing. None of these systems are perfect for you and your special snowflake of a book, but they're a good way in to define what you do. I talk to plenty of authors who have written a memoir, but they hate the word memoir. Memoir to them sounds self-involved or something. I don't know, something negative. So they wrote a book that is a memoir, and they want to kind of market it, but they don't want to call it a memoir. And it's like this issue where you're like, well, if you want the marketplace to sell it and have to shelve it, where are they going to shelve it? It gets us to challenge our own assumptions about what we do. I talk to so many authors, and I think it is very common for people to resist that idea of categorization. And I just want you to take that and just put it on the side for a moment, to allow yourself to think about categories, to think about mechanisms that are already in place that might give you a sense of a way into your readership. So the next step here is the idea of finding comparable books, which I talk about pretty often in some of my material. And the idea here is that we want to use these systems to do that. My favorite is using Amazon, and the really simple version of this is to find any book that you possibly can think of that is vaguely in the same category as your book, even if it's a massive bestseller. And then through Amazon or separately through Goodreads, both of these systems do a wonderful job of showing similar books. Customers who bought this book also bought. Sponsored books, people pay to sponsor them. There are different lists. People might mention other books in reviews. There are the category pages. They are a wonderful, not to overuse the term, gateway into this idea of, okay, that's not exactly my book, that's not exact comp, but it's in the universe. Now let's get to the solar system. Let's get to the planet. Let's get to the continent. Let's get closer and closer. You might not feel you're always there, but you're getting closer to it. I also think it allows you to think about your book in different ways. Sticking with the memoir example, I've worked with people who, well, my book, it takes place in this time, and all their comps are other books from this time. And it's like, well, that's not the only reason someone would read your book, right? Maybe it's the feeling it evokes, or maybe it's the journey that person is on, or maybe it's another context. So you get to think about your book in different ways. And I think if you take this as even mildly structured, you can kind of create a little spreadsheet of this if you want. Just start putting books in there, and you can kind of tag them differently. Well, this book is the right time frame. This book is the right character. This book is the right journey. This book has the right place. Things like that. Of course, it's like the first really nice day, and I open the windows, and now there's like car alarms going off. I'm so sorry about that. So that's another way in to think about your readers. Because once you start even figuring out categories or comps, you start getting able to look at reviews. And reviews on Amazon, on Goodreads, everywhere else, that's amazing. That is literally the voice of the reader. You can start seeing what do people write about books. And I've talked about this before, but it's one of those ways of having a way in. Even if you think this book is that's not my book, that's not my category. But I scanned through 50 reviews and the way they talked about that book, that's the feeling I want people to have about my book. And finally, you're getting to that human thing. You're resisting the idea of rejecting everything because of the category or the cover or whatever. And you're saying, oh, that's the feeling that a book evokes. That's what I want you to get to tap into that human part of this. You can also, there are helpers in this process. You can walk into a library and be radically honest. Hi, I'm an author. I'm a first-time author. I'm writing a book, and I think it's this or that. And can you just help me out? I'm trying to find other books that are this or this or that. Where would you even shelve that? Or can you think of any other book? Or you can be completely honest. You don't have to trick anyone. And what I find is that there are people sitting in these rooms, in libraries and bookstores, all day. And their jobs at times are boring, their jobs are difficult, their jobs are filled with minutia. And when you come to them as an expert, hi, you're surrounded by books and you are an expert in books, I could really use some help. Can you do anything to help me? And you're an author, you're someone creating, you love books. I find that people love helping you in that process. Is it always? Nope. You'll get some people that don't want to help and you'll just move on from that. Sometimes context really matters. Don't go to a Barnes & Noble at 2 o'clock on a Saturday after they had a big children's reading event and expect that bookseller can spend goo gobs of time with you. Go on a Tuesday afternoon. Go on a Wednesday evening, something like that. But I find that these are helpers, and it could be a librarian, a bookseller, it could be other authors asking them for help. It could be teachers, it could be book clubs. It's not that you're asking to use them, you're asking them in a very honest way. And you're asking for their very human and personalized assessment of that. And I think this is a good process for you to be collaborating with a real person in that process instead of struggling on your own with it. Now, the last thing I want to cover here is that idea that a lot of you or some of you might be writing multiple different things. Well, I write memoir, but I'm writing a novel and I'm writing a children's book and I have this series that's a nonfiction series. The way I like to look at this is I would encourage you to pick one. Pick the most important. Pick the project, if you had to go to a desert island, which one you take with you. Go through this process with that one project first. Because once you establish the routines and you hit a milestone with that one type of writing, well then you can apply it to the next one or to all of them. If you try to do that with your fiction and your nonfiction, your memoir, and your children's books all at once, it's a lot. It's a lot to track, it's a lot to dig into, and it allows you to then start using them against each other. Well, I hit a roadblock there, so I went over here, and I hit a roadblock there, I went over there, and you're always distracted. And you always feel inspired because you love your writing, but you're not making progress because you're bouncing back and forth, and it's almost like they're working against each other. All right, I will see you in the next video.